Just when you thought it was safe to go back to the intertube, Lob-EZ is getting more plays than a Rubik's Cube. 0123Z. You sitting with DJ Lob-EZ. Yo, you're getting all this for freezy. I once fell down and skinned my kneesies. I gave my dog a bath, now no more fleasies. I got more depth than the Mediterranean seas. It don't matter if I teach in law, politics, or the economies. You ain't got nothing to worry, 'cause it's my specialties. That's right, kids. I'm back. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about a little bit of the economy, and then we're going to be talking about the absolute monarchs, or better yet, the enlightened despots of Europe. We want to begin our lesson today, boys and girls, by talking a little bit about the economic system that existed in Europe prior to capitalism, and that was mercantilism. And we talked a little bit about this already in class, but it is an economic system where the state or the government, centralized government, is attempting to make sure that the economy of that particular state does well. The end goal, remember, boys and girls, is about gold and silver bullion. So the more gold that they have in the coffers, in the treasury, the better off they'll be. The goal also is to be self-sufficient, and trade is a necessary evil. The ultimate goal is to export manufactured goods, and in return import gold. All right. Along came the Enlightenment period, and a group of Frenchies known as the physiocrats began to challenge this notion. They found that unnecessary involvement in the economy would disrupt what they believed to be a natural system, a system that operated by certain universal laws, just like they were discovering in other systems during this time period. At any rate, the things that we talk about, tariffs and government support through subsidies, was something that was not considered a wise idea by the physiocrats. And from this group comes Adam Smith. He takes it a little bit further. All right. So if you were a mercantilist, you thought the ultimate value lied in, that's right, gold. All right. If you were a physiocrat, you believed that ultimate value lie with land. All right. But with Adam Smith, he takes it one step further, and he believes ultimate value to be in labor. Labor meaning a person mixing with natural resources to create some type of commodity, something that can be bought and sold. All right. From the physiocrats, we get the idea of the laissez-faire, which is basically a principle that believes that it's best for the government to stay out of the affairs of the economy, and we see that through Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. He kind of elaborates on the idea of laissez-faire and expands upon it. Okay, on the screen here you see the pillars of capitalism, 5 pillars of capitalism. Briefly going through those, private enterprise is the ability of, I guess, the right within a free marketplace market economy for people to be the owners of the means of production. Competition, of course, ensures that prices remain low and quality remains high. If competition is disrupted and a monopoly is created, that is one area that both the physiocrats and capitalists or Adam Smith believed that it was okay for the government to interfere in the economy to kind of prevent that. The idea of private property, anything that you come into possession with is a natural right and it cannot be taken from you without due process. Profit motive, we learn, is man's greatest incentive is that of money. Maybe not in all cases, but in most. Of all the forces out there that can motivate people to do one thing or another, the strongest seems to be moolah. Consumer sovereignty, I find this to be very interesting because the word sovereignty we know means power. So that means the consumer has power. And what that means is their decisions. They either buy a specific good or they don't. And by doing that, that gives information to the producers, valuable information on whether or not they need to continue to change their product, reduce prices, increase advertising, or any of the many ways that businesses are able to attract more customers. Again, labor is the ultimate source of value. Labor mixes with raw materials to make useful products. Okay, so those are some of the ideas that make up the basis of capitalism. What we see here on this screen is supply and demand matrix, and that's something that everybody is familiar with in the relationship that it has with price. But I put that up there to kind of illustrate what Adam Smith talked about as the invisible hand. The invisible hand of the marketplace. That's really what's, in a sense, controlling what businesses produce. And it is the belief by Adam Smith and other capitalists. See, he's considered an Enlightenment thinker, and that's because, and this is important, I didn't mention this earlier, but it's key. Adam Smith is an Enlightenment figure because he believes, just like they do, that human progress is possible. So he believes that because of economics, well, he also is an Enlightenment thinker because he believes that the economic system, if left to its own devices, will work perfectly on its own. It may have some downturns from time to time, but it's cyclical and it'll always come back. That it doesn't need to be meddled with. True capitalists believe that all economic crises should be left to work themselves out. There are many economists who believe that the Great Depression in the great old U.S. of A. That began with the stock market crash in 1929 was only made worse and extended and lengthened because of the government's intervention into the economy. That's not a very popular belief, but there are those economists out there that believe that nonetheless. All right. But again, the idea of capitalism helping bring about human progress and improving the general welfare for all people is, I think, in this day and age, kind of a controversial idea, especially that we see, in 2016 with the rise of political candidates like Bernie Sanders, who believes that capitalism is responsible in this country for the greatest levels of inequality in human history. So that's, and in case you were living under a rock, Bernie Sanders had large number of supporters and gave Hillary Clinton a run for her money. At any rate, how does that happen? How does the marketplace bring about improving the general welfare? Well, that's because people who want to make money, entrepreneurs who want to make money, are going to sell goods to people, and some of those goods, if purchased, are going to be beneficial. They are going to, we talked in class about medication, the pharmaceutical companies, and they spend a lot of money on research and development, and they come out with oftentimes life-saving medications. Well, that's an example right there of improving the general welfare, but they did it because of self-interest. These pharmaceutical companies didn't bring these drugs to market because they were great humanitarians. It's because they want to get paid. So they're great capitalists. And on the other end of the equation are the consumers. And the consumers are driven by self-interest. They want to buy as much junk as possible while spending the least amount of money. And they'll go to great lengths to try to negotiate and save money and search around, shop around, and find the best prices. All right? So when it comes to, if you think over time, all the great inventions and innovations in science, technology, medicine, heck, got air conditioning, hot water heater, and you take a hot shower in the morning and go outside and sweat to death and come inside and sit in the AC. I think that certainly improves my general welfare. And that wasn't possible a couple hundred years ago. Heck, that wasn't possible in most places in the United States 50 years ago. You ever lived through a hot summer in St. Charles, Missouri? Can you imagine it with no air conditioning? Better thank Adam Smith, improving your general welfare. That's right, I said it. Capitalism is a good thing. All right. One of the concepts that they talk about is free trade, and free trade is necessary. In the study guide, document C, I do believe, if memory serves me correctly, deals with the idea of trade. And if you look at a mercantilistic system, trade is almost adversarial, because you got a zero-sum game, because one group is going to be receiving a finite natural resource, and that's right, boys and girls, it's called gold. So in a transaction, one person is giving the gold up and the other person is receiving it. And anytime gold is to be had, well, that's because somebody is giving it up. And so that's, I guess, the purpose or the reason behind why it's kind of an adversarial transaction. But when we look at free trade, which the physiocrats and capitalists promote, it is mutually beneficial. So, like also in the study guide, I believe it was also document C, talk about grapes being grown in Scotland. And never heard of Scottish wine because the conditions aren't the greatest for making wine. But if you were a mercantilistic country, you're going to want to make everything domestically. And they're going to use tariffs to protect local producers, right? Well, if you're a free trader, you're going to acknowledge the fact that as Scots, you're lousy at making wine. So let the Frenchies or let the Italians make that wine for you. They'll do it better and they'll do it cheaper, right? What is it that you Scots can do? Well, we can make Scotch. We make great Scotch. We make 12-year-old single malt scotch, and by God, some people love it. Well, there you go. There's your ticket. Sell that. Export that. You make all kinds of money. All right? And so you can trade with the Frenchies their wine for your scotch. And guess what? No, not everybody's going to end up drunk. Silly child. No, everybody's going to make out in that situation. It's going to be mutually, what? Mutually beneficial. That's right, kids. Mutually beneficial. All right. So there you have it. Free trade not only is mutually beneficial, but it's good politically, because countries that are trading partners and they both kind of making out on the deal are going to end up being friends. That's right. No more war. All right. So capitalism cures all the social ills that we be suffering from. I'm moving on. Getting tired of talking about all this. Been talking about it for 2 days already. Class, none of you listen. Y'all playing on your silly phones. I'm up there trying to teach. Alright, now we're going to move on to the next topic, and that's the enlightened despots. Okay, because of the Enlightenment, there is this notion, natural rights. I believe it was John Locke talked about the natural rights that man possesses, and he is given to him or her by their creator. And those natural rights are life, liberty, and not the pursuit of happiness. That's Thomas Jefferson's idea. Nope. It's life, liberty, and property. And you cannot, because those natural rights were given to you by your maker, cannot have those taken from you arbitrarily. That means you need due process. You got to get your day in court before the government or anybody else can take those things away from you. So what we start to see is that people, this notion that people are equal, all right, under the eyes of the law, begins to bubble up from the ground, and it's a groundswell, and before long you got these ideas spreading to other countries. And because people are equal before the law, that they start to come up with other like ways in which those rights that they have translates into other rights, like the ability to worship freely, and the ability to challenge your government without ending up in a torture chamber inside some political prison like the Bastille in Paris. All right, but do not, I repeat, do not be misguided enough to think that this equality extends to voting rights. We don't need all them common peasants voting, because them people, they's ignorant and they's superstitious, and they're not very well versed on public policy because they spend too much time working. They don't have enough time. So we need to leave the decisions of the state to the leisure class, those people who are well educated and have the time on their hands to investigate and think about and perseverate on all these deep concepts. So we don't want a bunch of ignorant hayseeds having the right to vote, because next thing you know, they're going to be voting on things based on emotion, and they're going to make unwise choices. And before you know it, that's right, we got mob rule on our hands. And you know what that rhymes with? Mob rule. Mob rule rhymes with chaos. That's right. It sure does. All right. So essentially, there is a belief because of the Enlightenment that reform is necessary. Yes, but because we don't want the ignorant nincompoops voting, we need to leave that to those people who are most capable of bringing about real reform. And that's those with power or sovereignty. And that's going to be the enlightened despots. So it's important for you to know at this point that there are two ways for reform to take place. That's right. It can come from above or it can come from below. And most of these enlightened despots, they are enlightened, know that if they don't bring about reform, at some point in time, there's going to be a day of reckoning. And the people, the ignorant nincompoops, are going to get so upset, they're going to get out their pitchforks and their torches, and they're going to stick the rich people in the fanny and burn their houses down. So instead of waiting for that to happen, they go ahead and bring about that reform that we was talking about. All right. So enlightened despots are necessary. Got the power, but also they're educated well enough to understand that reform is necessary. But please don't make the big mistake and think that the reforms that they're bringing about are necessarily for humane purposes. You have to be a little cynical here, boys and girls. They're doing it. They're doing just enough to keep the people happy. All right? But their number one concern is staying in power. All right? And maintaining order so that they can keep the author of the Prince, Machiavelli, happy. Because we don't want him rolling over in his grave by these guys bringing about too much reform or not enough reform and there being chaos. Because remember, what does that rhyme with? I told you earlier. Wow, shoot, now I forgot. All right, well, let's move on anyway. Must not have been that important. Probably the most well-educated and most successful of the enlightened despots is Frederick the Great, 1740 1786. All right, he's the last of the Freddies. You may recall that his predecessors, all those other Freddies, found it necessary after the 30 Years' War and all the destruction that was done to Prussia and Brandenburg that to prevent future war and destruction and annihilation that they needed a strong military. But the problem was they're a bunch of farmers and they didn't really have enough money to do so, so they needed to employ the support of the nobility, who were known as Junkers or Junkers. You can call it Junkers if you say Youngermen, but if you say Jungermen, you got to call them Junkers. That's right. All right. So what they were able to do is buy off the nobility or buy the support of the nobility by promising them a couple of things. That they were going to have sovereignty over their own land and serfs, that they could basically do as they please on their land, and they're going to not have to worry about listening to the king tell them what they can and cannot do to their serfs. All right, and the other thing, or the other way in which he was able to, or all of the Freddies, to get the Junkers was to give them positions. That's right, in the military as officers, let them ride around on horses and swing their swords to and fro and make themselves feel real special. All right. Another thing that you need to understand about Frederick was it was all about the state to him. He was truly, truly patriotic through and through, and he was a very hard worker. Right? He didn't live a real lavish lifestyle like that other well-known absolute monarch, Louis XIV, who is rumored to have said, "I am the state." Like he is the force behind the mechanism by which everything it happens, that he's the center. No, Frederick had quite a different philosophy. He was a servant, the first servant of the state. So for him, the interests of his people was more important to his own personal desires. He went a little far with that. He was often seen walking around Berlin inspecting things, and if he found people doing something that they ought not to, he'd fuss at them. He'd pull out his little staff that he walked with, or his cane, and he'd beat him upside the head with it. So he pretty pushy fella. And that's what you gotta know about the Germans. Germans are hard workers. At least historically they are. Hard workers, and but they're a little cranky. And if you want a job done right and efficiently, you put a German on it. All right, but they're not exactly warm and fuzzy in all cases. All right. So what he was able to do was create or maintain, and perhaps even make better, the bureaucracies. The bureaucracies comprised the middle class people that other monarchs have used to kind of circumvent the power of the nobility. But these bureaucracies were based on merit, meaning there's a civil service exam. They have to be smart enough to pass these exams, and it does not matter any at all who their daddy is, or who their connections are. It's based on what you know, not who you know. So as a result, the bureaucracies inside of Prussia were run quite effectively, quite efficiently, and with very little corruption. That is a problem within government, corruption. I believe Donald Trump used the campaign slogan, he's going to drain the swamp. All right, once he got it to Washington, he's going to drain the swamp. Well, that's just a fancy or not so fancy way of saying there's a lot of corruption inside of Washington, and he's going to get rid of it. We'll see. All right. One of the things that's interesting that he was able to take advantage of was that all good little Prussian boys and girls, when they went off to school, were taught that putting their hand over their heart and saying their little national anthem and standing at attention was a good thing. They were taught that service to the state was a beautiful thing, and patriotism was at an all-time high under Frederick. Kind of like back in the 60s when the United States had a great president by the name of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who once said, I believe it was his inauguration speech, therefore, or what did he say? Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. All right? I don't know. A little commentary here. I think we could benefit from that based on how many people I see say the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning. Not very many. I think we could use a little patriotism. All right. Where were we at? Bureaucracies. That's right. Okay, one of the reforms he brought about was he codified Prussian law into a single code of laws. Well, what the heck does it mean to codify? Make a codex. Well, what's a codex? I don't know. Like a book full of laws and such. All right? So you got a uniform system of laws, and this is something that they did back in the olden days with the Byzantine Empire following up the Roman Empire. They had a guy by the name of Justinian back in the 7th century A.D. Anno Domini. And what he did was had his political advisors and legal advisors go through all the, probably at that point, over 1,000 years of legal decisions and edicts passed by previous emperors. And what he had them do was, streamline it. get rid of the junk we don't need. You know, that concept of you're innocent until proven guilty? That comes from the Romans and also survived by Justinian. The Byzantine Empire, which, when did it collapse, Shantae? When did the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, which was the capital, when did it fall, Shantae? I'm asking you. You should know this. That's right, Shantae, 1453. I'm very proud. I'm very proud of you. You're doing a very good job. You just keep it up now. All right. So one of the things he do is he gets rid of torture and, in some instances, capital punishment. All right. Here we see Freddie walking across a farmer's land, and he stopped his carriage, and he sees these farmers are growing potatoes. Right. He introduced potatoes to the Prussians, and that was a good thing because the potato is a wonderful food. You can live off it. Protein, carbohydrates, vitamin A and vitamin C in plentiful supply. Grows in rocky soil, and a family of 4 to 6 can live on potatoes alone, even if they only have about an acre of land. That's pretty amazing. All right. Initially, they used it for animal feed because it was a root grew underground. They used it to feed animals in the winter. That's called fodder, Fodder. They use that in turnips. But then they eventually figured out, hey, these potatoes don't taste so bad. Put a little butter and salt on them. In fact, I feel better after I eat potatoes. Not French fries. Make your face break out and get pimples. All right. So he brought about a lot of agricultural reforms, including introducing the potato, all right, and other innovations. And so that is something that is noteworthy. Moving on. Oh, it's just talking about how he didn't want to challenge the power of the nobility because he knew they were part of the reason why he was in power. So he needed to make sure that he didn't mess with the nobles, with the Junkers. All right, but one of the things that he was very much in love with was military. What's the nickname for Prussia? That's right, Vinny. The Sparta of the North. But unlike his predecessors, he actually used his military because you know what they say, an unused weapon becomes a useless weapon. So he wanted to use his weapons, his soldiers, and he's going to expand land acquisition. All right, a lot of monarchs do that. So he's kind of acting like a traditional monarch here because he needs to acquire lots of land. But the problem is that all the land that the Prussians own, they're all spread out all over the Holy Roman Empire. And he's trying to connect it. He's playing connect the dots, make all his land contiguous. So in 1740, he violates the Pragmatic Sanction, who the Emperor Charles VI worked real hard to secure that his little daughter, Maria Theresa, could be the Empress, or at least have her husband be the emperor and then she could rule. But and he wanted to make sure that everybody inside the Holy Roman Empire wouldn't revolt, and everybody signed this agreement. But then guess what? Freddie violated it. It became known as the War of Austrian Succession, 1740-1748. And right down there in the middle, over here. Oh, nope, but just right here. All right. Dang it. Silesia. That's the territory that he took from him. This is Prussia, 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 Prussia. It's Silesia. All right. So this is Austria. This is the Holy Roman Empire, right? And because they beat back the Ottomans after they attacked Vienna for the second time in 1673 and defeated them, they were able to take this territory that's now called Hungary. All right. What's the capital of Hungary? Budapest. How you know that? Because anytime Buddha is hungry, he's a pest because he bothers everybody. That's how you know. All right, so you got all this territory that's belonged to Maria Theresa, but 6 million Germans are now no longer Austrians, but now they're Prussians. And she didn't like that. This is a very rich area, very productive area, and she's not going to be too happy about that. She wants that territory back. And as long as Prussia has it, Prussia is going to be Austria's enemy. All right. Ooh, who are her allies? Maria Theresa's allies. The Brits, the Dutch. That's all that's really important. And then the Prussians had the Frenchies as their ally. All right. But the Prussians won. Okay. So, interesting thing happens. All right. So we got the Treaty of what is that? I forget how to pronounce that. I think it's Aix-la-Chapelle. All right, Aix-la-Chapelle. Aix-la-Chapelle. That's right. Basically, Austria isn't going to get Silesia back because they lost. So Prussia gets to hold on to that. But the deal is that Prussia is now kind of like a big boy. They get a seat at the table. All right, they get to sit at the adult table. They don't get to sit. They don't have to sit at the kiddie table anymore. All right, they proved themselves. But what this war does is it proves to Maria Theresa that countries don't necessarily believe in loyalty to one another. Loyalty is not a virtue that they understand very well. Self-preservation is, or self-interest, kind of like what Adam Smith said. They're motivated by self-interest, and if it's in their country's self-interest to violate a alliance that they have with you, then they're going to do it. All right, and because the Austrians could not rely on the Brits to help them, she decided that it was no longer advantageous to have them as an ally. So, under the advice of her foreign minister, Countess, she, and that's not important, but what the term is, diplomatic revolution. What does that mean? She reversed her alliance system, all right, and became friends with her longtime nemesis, the Holy Roman Empire's longtime nemesis. Who was their big nemesis? For a long time, 30 Years' War and before. That's right, the Frenchies. All right, they've been at odds with the French because the French are scared to death of the Austrians creating a powerful German state out of the Holy Roman Empire. But at this particular instance, they were able to buy off the Frenchies by giving them the Austrian Netherlands that the Austrians had gotten after the War of Spanish Succession. At any rate, they give the Frenchies land, and the Frenchies said, we'll support you. All right? And because England views France as a danger and a threat to them, they automatically jump ship and go to the Prussian side. And so now you got the Prussians and the Brits, and then you got the Frenchies and the Austrians. All right, so those are the two major alliance systems that exist, and that's to supposedly maintain a balance of power in Europe. All right, now the diplomatic revolution that took place actually contributed to the outbreak of another war, the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. All right, in Europe, most of the fighting is between Austria and Prussia. The French are involved a little bit, and are the Russians. But there's a whole other theater for this war. And where is that? Callie, I bet you don't know, but I'm going to tell you. That's right, girl. North America. Because the Brits, they got the 13 colonies, and then the French, they got all of Canada. And in fact, they got a whole bunch of interior land on the western side of the Appalachian Mountains. So that was another theater for where the war was fought. In fact, they named it the French and Indian War. But it was the same war, 7 Years' War. Anyway, um, the Prussians went over in Europe, and then the Brits, their ally, they went over in America. But it's amazing. Let's go back to Europe because this is a P-Euro. The reason why the Prussians won, in fact, really they should have lost. They defeated the Austrians and they defeated the Frenchies, but then they were faced with the Russians. And when the Russians engaged in battle with them, pushed them all the way back to Berlin, the capital of Prussia. But Elizabeth, the Empress of Russia, she dies, and her nephew, Peter the Third, comes to the throne. And Peter the Third is German, and he's a big fan of Freddie. And so he decides to send his Russian troops home out of respect for Frederick, who, in case you didn't know, was a great mastermind. In fact, I'll tell you a little something interesting. When, I don't know, probably 1807, 1808, when Napoleon was making his march across Europe and defeated the Prussians and walked into Berlin, he said, if Frederick the Great would have been here, we wouldn't. Meaning, Frederick the Great was such a genius, great mastermind. He had a tremendous amount of respect for him. All right? And he was basically saying we wouldn't have been successful. We wouldn't have been able to be successful because of Frederick the Great. It was so great. All right. So anyway, the conflict doesn't really change too much in Europe as far as boundaries and whatnot, but it does prove once and for all that Great Britain is the strongest country, and that's only because they're an island and they got a strong navy. Their army really ain't that good because the Americans beat them too, and we were a bunch of farmers. So the Brits really didn't have that great of an army. They had a great navy, but army not so much. But what's interesting, and we're going to be talking about this next video, but if you look over at the map, when the British defeat the Frenchies, they kick them out of Canada, all right? And if you look, then all that land on the western side of the Appalachian Mountains, which they weren't allowed to possess or populate and inhabit because it belonged to France, well, no longer. It belongs to the Brits. So guess what? A bunch of those Americans get real excited because they see all the land on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains as room for expansion, farms that could be opened up. But the Brits don't want them to do that because they don't want to have to defend them against the Native Americans, all right, who are, well, they're not all peaceful. Some of them are violent, and they give you, cut you, scalp you. At any rate, they didn't want to have to defend the colonists, so they forbade the colonists from moving across the that line, the Appalachian Mountains. Get into that later. Anyway, something that's interesting, we'll talk about a little bit here, is Poland. When we talk about aristocracy, a type of government controlled by the nobility, Poland's a great example because Poland didn't have a strong king. Because the way their system was set up, the nobles had all the power, and everything had to be unanimous decisions on everything. So nothing ever got done, and they had a terrible army. And so what we see is Poland goes bye-bye. By the end of the century, by the end of the 18th century, Poland no longer exists. They get absorbed by Prussia, Austria, and Poland. All right. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. All right, Maria Theresa and her son Joseph of Austria, both Enlightenment despots. Maria Theresa probably less so, but Maria Theresa more effective as a leader in general than her son. Her son just happened to be much more of a reformer, but he didn't live very long. He only lived 10 years. I mean, he only ruled as emperor for 10 years, but Maria Theresa had 16 children. Can you believe that? There's 11 of them, or 12 or something. I don't know. But a bunch of them died. 6 of them something died. You know what they died of? smallpox, and a couple of them didn't. Had a beautiful daughter, and then she got like smallpox in her late teens, and nobody would marry her, so she had to go like live in a convent or something. Yeah. Anyway, nobody want to marry her. So don't eat too many French fries. Get pimples. All right. Now we got. Let's see. Marie Therese. Yeah, we already know she lost Silesia. So that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in her reforms. Okay. She was. She definitely was the leader. She had a husband, but she was in charge. There's no doubt about it. She was a strong personality. So we don't see that too often, right? Female strong leaders, but she was, right? So she was effective for the most part. Okay, so her orbit is no longer Holy Roman Empire. Holy Roman Empire is kind of going bye-bye. It's kind of going away, all right? And certainly their influence is pretty much kaput, all right? That's a German word. It means broken. They lose Silesia. They've got Bohemia. They've got Austria, obviously. But because they lose Silesia, they begin to increasingly look to the east as an area for them to expand and strengthen themselves, and that's Hungary. All right, never very successful though. The Hungarians are a very independent people, and they do not want to be governed very by an absolute monarch. They remain a lot of their independence. They maintain their independence. So just think of like the French before Cardinal Richelieu. All right, all the autonomy that the provincialism that existed. That's pretty much the case in Hungary. And Maria Therese and her son tried, but they were not able to centralize too much power over them. But they try, and she creates a whole bunch of bureaucracies to do so in order to build up her military, but limited success there. All right. Austria is a fading power. All right. So one of the things, though, that she was concerned about was the well-being of her peasants and the way in which the nobility. See, this is the trend in Central and in Eastern Europe. The nobility had a lot more authority, sovereignty over the peasants. In Western Europe, they all moved to the cities, all right, and gained their, gain more rights and freedoms. But anyway, in Eastern Europe, that's not the case. But one of the things that she was concerned about was how many feudal obligations that the peasants had or the serfs had to come up with, and she didn't like the fact that they had to work so long. All right, and so what she's trying to do is she's trying to make nice with the peasants so that they won't turn on her. If they're going to turn on anybody, they'll turn on the nobility. And so she limited labor service, or the robot. Crazy. 2 to 2 days per week. All right, and so that was something that was seen as a nice little reform. All right, and move on to her son Joseph II. He was probably the most, I guess, radical or progressive thinking enlightened despot, but as I said, his reign didn't last long enough. So anyway, what's the other thing? What we say about change, right? Talk about change all the time. Bring about too much change, it's going to be a what? A backlash. That's right. So we know if you push for too much change too fast, that people ain't going to like it, and they're going to get mad. And that's exactly what happened. All right, so he basically freed the serfs, changed all the laws, got rid of the death penalty, total religious freedom, total religious toleration. But that's not too novel. But other people are doing it too, like Freddie did it. But one of the things he did was he believed so much in the rights of the peasants that no, he wanted to change the economy from barter, like they trade goods for goods. He wanted to turn it into a monetary economy, and he wanted the nobles to pay the peasants with cash money. But because they were so unaccustomed to it, they didn't like it, and that made them actually angry at Joseph II. All right, and he sold a bunch of land, sold a bunch of the land that belonged to the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is really fallen as far as its influence goes. All right, so that's pretty much it. He wasn't all that effective, so whatever. But Catherine the Great, all right. So she's another figure. I mean, pretty close to up there with Freddie as far as the reforms. Hers were a little bit more sweeping. Like her, I guess her goals were a lot more ambitious. And when you have ambitious goals, you don't always, you don't succeed in all of them. But she succeeded in some. But anyway, let's look at her accomplishments. All right, so she enters the picture. She's married to Peter III, who was believed to be mentally unstable. And when he came to power after his auntie Elizabeth dies, what does he do? He makes peace with Freddie, right? Frederick the Great, and that ends the 7 Years' War. The army felt betrayed by his decision to do that. So a country that was well known already for conspiracies and intrigues, Catherine saw an opportunity. Now, this is a woman who I would, when I think of an animal or an insect to represent her, I think of the Black Widow. Because the Black Widow, the females will kill, and I think they even eat their mates after they reproduce. That's crazy. But anyway, she has her lover and his brothers, who were officers in the military, kill her husband so that she can be crowned. And because she's got this backing, the support of the military, she is able to succeed in her coup d'etat, which is a seizure of power. All right, and it is made legitimate. All right, so that's pretty crazy. All right, so some of the things that she did to try to reform, she follows in Peter the Great's footsteps, and that is through the westernization of Russia. All right, they're not running around wearing robes and long beards anymore, but education is really limited, and so she's trying to westernize the culture by bringing in artists and educators and architects and trying to model cities as much as possible after Western Europe. Okay, so that's one. Another one is, through education too. The opening of schools. That's a big one. So she's important in that regard with reform. The other one that she tried to do, she tried to codify their law. She tried to create a codex and a unified system of laws. She attempted. She was very well educated. She actually wrote part of the instructions on how to go about doing that, and it did not succeed because the Russians are still a little too backwards. All right, but she was able to bring about some reforms politically, and she was able to kind of model the class of nobility that she used, kind of serve the state, kind of created a requirement for them to serve the state, similar to what you see in England with the justices of the peace. All right, and so this was how she was able to have some success politically, but she did not succeed in creating a unified legal code. Her third and probably strongest or most epic reform isn't really a reform at all. Oops, forgot about this. Uh, what cuts her domestic reforms short and really causes her to kind of not double down, but kind of run back into the arms of the nobility. You know, kings and nobles are always, monarchs and nobles are always fighting each other for power, and it's a cantankerous relationship. It's antagonistic, but what we're going to see, kids, is that no longer are the nobles and the monarchs fighting each other so much as like working together, because they realize that the population of the masses of the poor and dispossessed are growing, and they're vulnerable. So they're going to be friends with each other because they got a lot more in common with each other than they do with all the poor folk. Um, so anyway, there was a revolt, Pukachev's revolt, largest in Russia's history, even larger than the watch your mouth, Bolshevik Revolution that brought communism, made Russia the USSR, and Vladimir Lenin coming to power. That Russian Revolution was smaller than the Pukachevs, so this was quite violent. And as a result, they were finally able to put it down, had the leader executed, and so she realized that she needed to make sure that she's got the support of the nobility. So what does she do? She passes the charter of nobility that says, forevermore, no longer do you have to pay taxes. You are forever tax exempt, and you can do whatever you want to the serfs. I mean, you want to light them on fire, I guess you can go ahead and do that. All right. So she really is not a great reformer. All right. She liked to write letters to philosophers in France. Like she was a pen pal to Voltaire. They thought she was pretty great, but she really wasn't, because of the way she treated the peasants. And she, when the partitioning of Poland takes place, and all the land that she acquires, she makes a whole bunch of, like, 1 million more serfs. All right, and they're really, from this point forward, there is no difference between a serf and a slave, like the type of slave that you would see in the United States. The only difference is that in the South, in the Americas, they didn't allow them to live as families. All right, they often, they prohibited reproduction, and they would split families up. But in Russia, the families could stay together. But as far as the other differences, I mean, they were, for all intents, the serfs were slaves. So under Catherine, moving forward, they're all going to be slaves. All right, what else? Land acquisition. All right, she gains a bunch of land by going to war with the Ottomans. All right, and sweeps down south, and is able to once and for all get what Peter the Great was after, and that is a warm water port into the Black Sea. And the Black Sea will give you access to the Bosporus Straits, which will also get you into the Mediterranean. And so by this time in Europe, the Ottoman are known as the sick man of Europe. They are a receding power. They had their moment in the sun, and now they are pretty much in full retreat. So she's able to beat back the Ottomans. Now, she takes a whole bunch of territory, but Frederick takes notice of this, and it makes him scared, because he's afraid that she gets too much land, she's going to upset the balance of power. And so what he does is he hatches a plan. If she will return much of the land, she still keeps her warm water port on the Black Sea, on the Crimean Peninsula, but if she gives a bunch of that land back to the Ottomans, what she'll get in return is they will divide up Poland. So the partitioning of Poland, that's the reason behind it. So as not to upset the balance of power. And of course it's self-serving, because Prussia gets a bunch of land too. And now Prussia is no longer super divided, it's sort of contiguous, connected, and Austria goes along with it too because they get land. So after 1, 2, 3 partitions, 1793 was, or 1795 was the last partition of Poland. Poland ceases to exist. All right. So if you look at all this is Russia, but the part that she added to it is green. All right. And something else that she gets credit for, she gains more land for Russia than any other czar or monarch or leader in Russian history. So that's quite an accomplishment. Probably her largest was land acquisition. So she gets land in Eastern Europe, like from Poland, and then she also gets land from the Ottomans down in southeastern Europe, the Black Sea. All right, and there you see the land being divided up about Poland. That's it. 1 hour and 55 seconds. I know it's long, but I covered a ton of material. All right, boys and girls, y'all have a good night. I'm going to bed. It's late.